You got it now, okay. All right, we're ready to proceed with the next presentation. Joining us today is Diann Weaverling from MedAire, and her team. She'll introduce the rest of her team, but they've got a presentation that's going to a little bit off topic as far as the Honda jet goes, but nonetheless important for the type of operations that we do. So with that, Diann, I'll pass things over to you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for having us. We're very honored to be here. My colleague Chris Bigger will also be presenting with me today. Just a little bit about MedAire. So we are located in Phoenix, Arizona. We've been around for nearly 40 years. Our founder, Joan Sullivan Garrett, female founder, gotta love that, started this business about 40 years ago, and we're happy to say that the ethos has carried through today. And we're going to talk a little bit today about our services that we offer, and just in the spirit of the conversation that's been happening so far today with safety, how we can kind of fit into that as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Diann. And then my name is Chris, and we're also joined by our colleague Jeff Dickey in the back. So while we do have slides today, and it is kind of a different topic, we want to make sure that it's open discussion. So if there's a question you guys have throughout, or if there's something where you find it, we could add relevancy, just let us know, and we'll spend some extra time and go from there. So what do we do? Who's heard of MedAire in the room? And I know we talked before. Good to see you. No. So as an industry, we do offer medical security assistance, aviation medical kits and equipment, and that's for a whole host of different industry verticals, from commercial aviation, business general aviation, right? So Part 91, 135 in the management. When we even support commercial maritime and yachting, and then crew member training. And I think as we walk through these next few slides here, you'll kind of see how all facets of that come together, and what is unique in the market to a small cabin or light aircraft, right? Because we don't always think about these things in that segment. And then how it's relevant in terms of operational safety, SMS, and ERP implementation. So as Diann mentioned, almost 40 years now. This is over 35. If you look at the bottom right of this screen, you see 310 calls per day. That's mind-blowing if you think about that many calls in flight across the globe daily and what we're doing. When you look at private aviation, we are the gold standard in terms of, and not only gold standard, but we set the tone for telemedicine. It was Joan that created the concept and what we do. And then commercial aviation, flight attendants across the world, we are supporting on the ground. We look at the types of cases that we support, passenger fit to fly. I think if you look at this from a light aircraft perspective and who you're flying, especially from charter, you don't always know who's in the back, right? And sometimes there could be some difficult discussions that you may need to have. This person doesn't look well, but I'm not going to go up and tell Mr. Smith he doesn't look well. So let's connect him with the medical professionals to really gather the information to say, how are you feeling? Are there any conditions that we should know about? And then have a medical plan in place throughout the duration of travel. And then it goes through the gambit there, but really touching on security. And security is another interesting component in this market segment, where you think about it as, is it operational? Is it personal? Is it needed? Or is it a nice to have? And we'll touch on that here in a little bit.
So talking a little bit about in-flight emergencies on light jets. As Chris said, we handle about over 300 cases a day, coming from all different types of aircraft. But with light jets, obviously it's a little more challenging because of the space that you have on board, but they still happen. And we collect a lot of data when we open cases and speak to our clients. And the data shows that most medical events, and they're not all emergencies, we use emergencies quite loosely, right? It doesn't have to be a major medical event for our clients to call us. But most of them do happen within the first hour of the flight. So oftentimes you think, oh, I'm only going from point A to point B, and it's a two-hour duration. But studies show that most of the medical events do happen in that first hour. So everyone is, obviously exposed to this. But awareness is key when being able to handle a medical event on board. So with your operations the way it is, the ability to call down and speak to our operations that consist of communication specialists as well as our physicians. Our physicians speak to our clients on every single call. We have a database that hosts airports, EMS, hospitals all over the world. Very, very global. I don't know the exact number of those airports now, but we've never come across one that we don't have in our database. And with each one of these airports comes the tower information, the Port Authority information, all the pertinent phone numbers that we would need to be able to get in touch with someone. So depending on the medical situation that's happening on board the aircraft, a call down to MedLink, MedLink is a service of MedAire, same company. It's the in-flight service part of MedAire. A call down to our MedLink center, pilot can speak with the physician and say, this is what's happening in the back of the aircraft. Here's where we are. Where do we go from here? And then we can look in our database. If it's a cardiac event, we're going to look in our database for the closest suitable airports around you, and then we'll look at those airports and see what good medical facilities are in that area as well. Because there's a big difference with medical facilities, right? If it's a pediatric case, then we want to get you into a hospital has good peds, right? So we have all this access available to us because time to ground is crucial, right? Depending on the situation, strokes, obviously cardiac events, time to ground is very, very important. And if you're flying domestic, you can pretty much put that aircraft down anywhere and find some good medical care. But instead of just choosing a spot, saying we're going here, if you speak to us, then we can advise you from a medical standpoint which would be the best option to go to.
No, those are all great points, Diann. Thanks. And so we're going to do a small attempt at mind reading here. So operating in a light aircraft, if there was a medical emergency in the back, by raise of hands, who would just land the aircraft?
What was the question?
Who would just land? Say, I'm gonna get on the ground and land as quickly as possible.
Well, pretty much me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I take an air-based problem, turn it into a ground-based problem.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
If it was a guy choking on food, of course, I would do that. But if it's a specific thing where you land and all of a sudden you're in Widows Bluff, Arkansas, and there's no hospitals around, what are you doing?
Great point.
Right.
And so the reason why I ask that is because we literally answer that question every single day, or have that response every single day. Hey, I operate this aircraft, and we hear it with King Air, we hear it with Honda Jet, we hear this quite often. Hey, I'm just going to land the aircraft if there's any medical event in the back. Well, you got on the ground faster, that's great. But by doing so, you just put your passenger, the rest of the crew, and everyone else at risk. Why? And I because I'm from Wichita, so it's in the middle of nowhere, so we like to joke about that, right? But say you're traveling from Phoenix and you're going on to New York, right? You're going on the White Plains, and you get over to Wichita and there's a cardiac event. Well, you could land in Wichita for sure, and you could be on the ground. There are medical facilities, but if you call MedAire, MedLink, you're going to have a better understanding to say, hey, I could fly a few minutes to the south and be in Oklahoma City. I could fly a few minutes to the north and be in Kansas City, and then I could have cardiac specialists on the ground based on where I am in the air in flight, right? And so when you're having that one-way communication that Diann mentioned, with an in-flight medical emergency for you guys, it becomes recognition. And I think that's where this slide becomes important, because it's recognizing there's an emergency. It's having the ability to communicate and coordinate with someone on the ground with the expertise to put you on the ground in the right location, so that risks, right, of landing in Wichita and then even having the additional cost of medevac on to Kansas City, or even an ambulance ride down to Oklahoma City. No, Eagle Med is right there in Wichita. Yeah, I drive by it every time I go to the airport. Right, but it's all about efficiency, right, and moving things forward. So it's recognition, focusing on safety of operating the aircraft, and then getting on the ground in the right location.
Yeah, and in addition to that, so we'll make a recommendation where we would prefer you to land and what hospital that we feel would be best for the patient to go to, but we also make that happen for you. So once on the ground, we would have EMS, whether it's an ALS or BLS, ambulance meet the aircraft at the FBO. We'd make those arrangements for you, have that EMS there at the plane side. So they're now transporting the patient to hospital. We follow that patient all the way to the hospital and make sure they get there safely. We can medically monitor them once they do get there. So it doesn't just stop once you land. And it's kind of up to the discretion of our clients how long they want to keep us involved. Now in the US, quite simple. Once you get outside of the US, maybe Mexico, the Caribbean, becomes a little difficult. Sometimes with language capabilities, we do have an assistance center in Mexico City. So for interpretation services, local knowledge, we rely upon them to help us out. But just, we do follow it. Once you're on the ground, our service doesn't stop. We continue to follow until that patient has improved. So here's a case study, and this is just an example. This is a real-life case. So this CEO was traveling, starting to experience some chest pain. And again, all this information that's on this slide, pain radiating down his left arm, this is all signs of a cardiac event. Just because someone has chest pain doesn't always mean it's cardiac, right? It could be something else. The call was made to us. We did identify the nearest diversion point where we could put the aircraft down. Now we base our diversion recommendation on the medical information that's provided to us. Of course, we're never going to make that decision on our own because we're going to be speaking to the pilots and also your OCC, because we know medically where we would like you to go, but again, weather, fuel, all of this, runway length, all of this plays a part in it as well. So we, with the flight deck as well as with the OCC, make that decision to divert the aircraft. And then again, like I said, we do make the coordination on the ground for the EMS to meet the aircraft. So we also manufacture our medical equipment. And as Chris touched on, we also have training. So this training can be for crew, can be for your pilots, any ground operations folks as well, also for passengers on board the aircraft.
Yeah, and I think what we've been talking about today is a lot of the growth that's happened so quickly with Volato, right? In such a short period of time, and it's phenomenal. And I think as we sit back as partners in the back and we listen to the things that you guys have implemented so early, being above and beyond to pilot operation, the rest and safety standards and all these things. These are all items that should be under consideration in terms of SMS ERP, but that full safety integration for passenger support. And if it goes into passenger and lifestyle support, how does that look? And so we get onto the onboard medical equipment, making sure that things are right-sized, right? For crew, where are our kits located? What type of kit is there? What's in it? The first aid training, when you look at things from a light aircraft, and I always look at it from the perspective of how much room do I have? What's within the norm? If I have to, if I'm in that right seat and someone's choking, right? Or if someone goes into a cardiac event, I'm not in a wide cabin. I can't put them in the aisle. These aren't things that I can do. So with that situational awareness, understanding the tools and the equipment that are on board the aircraft, how am I going to respond? And I think on-site training to get in and really training in your own house and in that smaller cabin to understand the space limitations and the things that you may not think of become very critical. And then going through that training, understanding the coordination with MedLink doctors. What's this real-world tabletop exercise look like, right? Someone has an allergic reaction. Someone has a cardiac event. How can I communicate, deploy the equipment, and provide CPR going forward? And then we walk through into the next scenario.
So another case study that did happen. 2 pilots on board this aircraft, no cabin attendants. Gentleman in the back started having chest pain, did lose consciousness, but it was actually the passengers who assisted. Had some training, knew where the medical equipment was, and did CPR while this passenger was seated in their seat, and did that by getting a service tray, putting it behind him, and performing the CPR on him. So, and all of this is not something that you might think about every day, right? But this is something that we would train. And as Chris said, our trainers actually go on board the aircraft, run through these scenarios in that situation, so it's more real life instead of doing it in a classroom somewhere. The VP did get CPR to the ground. We had EMS waiting for the aircraft when they arrived, transferred him off to the hospital. You know, again, a good save. And of course, they were in a portion of the country where we could get them on the ground quickly. Weather was not a problem. And then we had the EMS there to transport him over. And thankfully, he survived and spent a few days in the hospital and carried on. So for our medical professionals, in addition to the air-to-ground service, we also can, if you have someone who's traveling on one of your aircraft and they do have a medical history or maybe a medical condition, we can provide medical escorts to travel on board the aircraft. Sometimes it's just for peace of mind. And you guys had a lot of those flights from Florida up the East Coast. We are very familiar with those flights because we put a lot of medical escorts on board those aircraft because of elderly passengers. And sometimes it's not necessarily that they need medical attention, it's just for peace of mind of the family. But we can take equipment on board depending on the situation. And anytime we do get a request for this, our medical team gets as much medical information as they can about the passenger. And then they're going to make a recommendation. Maybe you should carry this on board, you know, in addition to the medical escort for safe travel. So it's all about safety. It's all about keeping everyone on the aircraft safe.
Yeah, and I think this slide lends itself more towards the experiential within your client base, right? And who are the folks you're going to be chartering? You don't always know, but they're going to call in, they're going to have requests. So if you look at that northeast to that southeast connection, which you may be looking at, we understand that space is limited, especially on the Honda Jet, right? It doesn't make sense to have another medical professional or someone traveling with for that leg. But if they're going to be there for extended periods of time and say their primary care isn't there and they're going to need some type of nurse or something of that nature, then those are things that you could share with us that we could help coordinate while they're away from home for, again, that extended period of time and really have that concierge focus.
Yeah, and Chris touched a little bit earlier about the pre-travel. If you do have someone that presents themselves who doesn't feel well or maybe looks unwell, or maybe they've had a recent hospitalization or recent surgery, and there's just a question in your mind, I wonder if this person is really safe to travel this 4-hour flight. You can call us at any time and we're going to ask some medical questions and give a recommendation. Of course, we never ask for names. We get an age and a gender and what's happening right now and more details about this recent surgery or hospitalization if you have it available. Based on the flight duration, then we make a recommendation. Yeah, we feel this person is safe to go on this 4-hour flight. Or we might say, we would advise that they maybe get checked out and get cleared by a physician before they travel. Now again, it's a recommendation. You do with it whatever you want. The captain is always in command, so it's just our recommendation based again on the medical information that we have. And again, we have medical guidelines that we've put together through 40 years of service and through thousands and thousands of cases, so our team follows those. All of our physicians that make these recommendations are emergency trained physicians. So they're very quick at making decisions. Bedside manner is probably not their forte, but that's okay. You don't necessarily need that. It's just it's the expertise and the quickness that they can deliver it in.
Absolutely.
So this just talks a little bit about what Chris touched on. If they do have a long trip, we can provide a medical assistant to travel with the family. If there's something that does need to be medically monitored during the life of that trip, and we can do this all over the world. So in addition to our in-flight, so if something's happening on board the aircraft, for the guests on board as well as for any of the crew on board, while traveling away from home. If you have a medical event, you can also reach out to us. And again, we have a database of over 100,000 providers around the world that we've credentialed and vetted. And so we would be able to, depending on what's going on, where you are in the world, we would be able to refer you out to a good either clinic, dentist, hospital. We have all this in a database, and we would be able to make a good, sound decision on where we would like you to be seen. A lot of times what happens is you'll be at a hotel, call down to the concierge, say, you know, maybe a migraine, something going on, food poisoning, and they might send you to their brother's, uncle's, sister's clinic down the street. May not be the best choice, just because there might be a kickback somewhere in the world for these types of things, but we have credentialed and vetted providers that we have relationships with that we can guide you to, get you there safely. We also have the ability to do teleconsultations, so you don't have to leave the hotel room. We could do a video call. There's prescription delivery service that goes along with this as well. So there's a lot of those little nice things to have when you're away from home. Also, mental health support. Listening to the NTSB's presentation about some of these accidents, there's a lot of little trauma that comes along with those sometimes. And thankfully, mental health has been talked about a lot more recently. But we offer that as well. Phone call into us, and we can get a mental health counselor on the phone with the patient straight away. Also, of course, talked about the teleconsultation. Guarantee of payment. This is something that if you are away from home, and especially outside of the US where maybe your personal health insurance doesn't apply, we can help put a payment for you into the hospital or clinic on behalf of your employer. And then we have developed an aviation app that can be used on the ground or in the air. We've made it so it's a little bit easier for the passengers or for the patient themselves to give good medical information. Oftentimes we'll receive calls and we'll say, what's going on with the passenger? Well, you know, they had pasta for dinner last night and they went for a 4-mile run this morning. Not necessarily important for us to know, right? We want to know what are their signs and symptoms right now, if they have any medical history, are they currently taking any medications? All of these things give our doctors a much better idea as to actually what's happening with them. So we've developed this app to kind of walk the user through the good questions to ask. Anything to add?
Yeah, and so if we look at that, there's a lot of different layers there, right? There's a lot of different layers of help and support, but let's apply it to some of the things we've talked about throughout today, right? And in the last presentation, we heard about crew rest. What does that look like? How do we use it wisely? You know, I think that if we look at that time that we're off and we have a short period of recovery, right, we want to make the best use of that time. And if we look at it from a practical level, I think it's safe to say that we've all been burned out before. We've all felt burnout. We've all been tired. We just don't feel great. And we just say, time to pick up the bootstraps and get going. Well, if you talk about efficient use of that crew rest and the things that are at your fingertips, you know that there are partnerships with the ground-based operator. You know there are things that you can leverage, one, to focus on the mental health and support that Diann mentioned, or say, you know what, I'm not feeling the greatest. I want to be fit and ready to go tomorrow. Let's get in touch with the right people for the right recommendations and make sure that we're ready to go. And so I think if you look at all these different layers there, it does lend itself that safety net to make sure that you are using your time and your rest efficiently to be the best that you could be the next day.
Yeah, and one of our medical directors has done extensive research on the fatigue and written some pretty good papers on it, and our physicians are always trained on this as well, and so do take that into account when they're speaking to them. Yep. So this motor vehicle accident in Mexico is unfortunately extremely common. Motor vehicle accidents are probably one of the main reasons that we have a lot of crew around the world that are calling us for assistance. This happened to be a co-pilot that was involved in an accident, transported to a nearby hospital, so by first responders at the location. And I don't remember, it was in Mazatlan. So first responders in Mazatlan transported them to hospital. And then the next call was made to us, which is great because the sooner we can become involved in a case, the better. We have more medical management over it. And so our team got involved then. We vetted the hospital where they were taken to. Sometimes they don't always take them to the most appropriate facility. Maybe it's the closest. Maybe it's the one that the EMS provider is more familiar with. But it may not be the preferred one in that area. So we take a look at the hospital where they were transported to. We look in our database. We'll have it listed. We'll see if it's our preferred. And then if it's not, we can transport them to the preferred hospital. Then we get involved, we open up a case, and we keep this case open and medical monitor this patient until they're fit to go home. Whether that's back on a corporate aircraft, maybe a commercial aircraft, maybe the condition is bad enough, we want to get them out of Mazatlan, back to the US. We can arrange air ambulances to evacuate them out. We can repatriate them back. So there's a lot of different options that we can do. But our team is trained to monitor these conditions. They know the industry very, very well. They know the restraints that are on pilots and the demands. So it's unfortunately, like I said, it's very, very, very common where we get these types of cases. Pilots have a tendency to be very adventurous, if you will. And we've had some pretty good cases over the years. I think probably my most favorite one is we had a pilot that was hand gliding. I think it was in Jamaica. And he actually called us from a tree. He was hanging upside down in a tree, but he called us. And so what do I do now? Like, well, thanks for calling. We'll get you some help.
Yeah, just hang out a while, I guess.
Yeah. And again, they like to rent motorcycles in some of these more exotic places, and traffic laws are different everywhere. So yeah, they get themselves into some pickles.
I apologize if you mentioned it. Do you engage with State Department for repatriation and bringing folks?
Yep. So we're on a lot of the embassies and State Department's call list. Yeah.
Okay.
So if they have someone, they're gonna reach out to us for our assistance. That's right. Yep.
Yeah, so I think when we look at all the different layers that we've touched on today, we've talked about the medical, we've talked about how really there are ground-based partners and providers out there that focus on your well-being and safety from a medical perspective. And when we talk security, be it domestic or international, we always think AvSec, right? So we talk about what's happening at the airfield. Well, what's happening in the airspace, right? There's a lot of different functions here. And when we look at the light aircraft segment, it really opens itself up to quite a few different things, right? I mean, you do have from charters some high net worth individuals that are on board, right? Again, you don't know who's there, who's always in the back. But you get into, well, what does aircraft vandalism look like? That's where your AvSec from an operational perspective comes in. We've all seen the uptick. I think if we look at Elon Musk and his spat on Twitter, right? People are logging what's happening with aircraft, right? Unless you have a mass tail. And then, wow, the uptick that we've seen domestically in the last one, over the last, say, 18 to 24 months is just mind-boggling. And so knowing that you have a partner, and I think we can go to the next slide, Diann. I think knowing that there's a partner out there that has an understanding of not only the operational, but the personal, the granular side. We all go to some places. I don't know. I could throw out a number of cities domestically, but I don't want to insult anybody because we always have home. But I'll use Wichita. There are parts of Wichita that aren't all that great, right? And but having that personal touch and understanding that as Volato, you guys work to build a lifestyle for your clients, a concierge approach, and your crew, that there is support out there that does focus on the individual. And what that means here is if you say take it for a ride by Mexico City Taxi, we've all been to cities that we've been familiar with, Uber, taxi, we've been there 100 times. Sorry, I've got feedback, so I'm trying to move away from the mics here. But that cab goes a different way, right? Wow, I've just stayed at the same hotel, it's going a different route. Don't really feel the greatest about what's happening right now. Do you call 911? Probably not. It's not an emergency yet. but you don't really know the situation. So there are partners out there where Diann mentioned the app where you can connect with us, you can connect with someone so that they can begin tracking with your approval, your location, understanding what's happening, being able to paint that picture, again, from that personal safety perspective. And so it's all about being comfortable in where you are and that added layer of security. And so you start to look at operations, safety management systems, ERPs. What does that mean? And so I think if we talk through everything today, we start to talk through applicability. What does it mean to you guys? What's it mean as your flight departments evolve? What's it mean for your clients and on that personal level? And there is that whole host of options in those layers there that help you through the medical and security systems, right? What happens when you're in the air and you're on the ground? The comprehensive training, is it by aircraft type? What happens in the hangar? Provider network, knowing that there are ground-based providers, again, that no matter where you are, be it at home, in the air, the office, the hangar, you name it, there are people that can give you the advice that you need. And then case management, which Diann's talked about with all of these scenarios, be it domestic or international, knowing that if something happens, that we've got your back. And we are watching through from the time that you're calling for a prescription, through is it admission to the hospital, the guaranteeing payment, getting you home. It's really that holistic 360-degree view of your well-being that a good partner should be, and that's where we focus.
Do you want to talk about crew check?
Yeah, we could talk a little bit about crew check. And so crew check is something that is more along the future technological advancement of where MedAire is going. But that's something where from an operations perspective, you could really get into understanding where your crew and your assets are, right? So as you start building out these systems and these programs, it's going into the MedAire portal and it's bringing everybody into one-way, two-way communication through the MedAire app so that, hey, did something happen in Detroit that we need to be aware of the security risk and checking into people within the vicinity? It really gives that operational scope and the ability to know what's happening in real time with all your people and assets.
So today, if we know that you have an aircraft, let's say Mexico, for instance, with all the volcanic activity that's going on down there, if we know that you have an aircraft down there, back in the olden days, we used to actually call out to your OCC and say, are all your crew accounted for? We know you're there, you have a tail down there, is everyone accounted for? Now, again, with technology advancements, we're able to work with our clients to do a check with the crew, make sure that they're there. We also have something that's called a trip watch. So if you do know that you might be going to someplace undesirable in the world, that we can open up a case proactively, have this open, have the information in our database so we know that where you are, and if something does go on in that area while you're there, then we can of course reach out and check on you. So it's something that a lot of our clients use on a regular basis, and sometimes it's even on some very short flights. But again, it's just for awareness. And we can put as much information into these trip watches as you would like to give us. If there's medical information that we should know about maybe one of your principals that's traveling on board, then we can add that into that case. It's all archived, it's all in our database system, and it just pertains to that one case, right? We're not going to keep this information for, the next trip, but it's all very customized to that particular trip. What else have we got? Is that it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so we've definitely gone through this scope of services and things that are available to you guys and kind of walk through some of the recognition needs, how to communicate, some of the risks that are out there. But what questions do you guys have about how we could drive that home and see how it's more meaningful in your day-to-day operations? Yes, sir.
I guess one for standard.
Lights on. Great. New guy, apologies. Are our crew CPR required? And do you guys see any potential liability issues if the situation were to arise and CPR needs to be administered?
It's a great question. And I think we keep using the term recognition because that's what drives it home. That's what becomes important for you guys as crew, right? Recognizing that there's an issue. Once you are on the line with a MedLink physician, right, then that duty of care transfers to our doctors. So we speak specifically to liability, right? Now you're acting under the care and the advisement of a physician. So if they say, administer CPR, apply the AED, it's time for an ECG if you're so well equipped. Or hey, you have a prescriptive kit, go ahead and get that nitro, EpiPen, etc. All of those scenarios, that duty of care passes to our physicians and that liability is passed on to them as well. Yes, sir?
Can you share with us the most challenging thing that MedAire has done with light jets? Any event, something that really taxed your system but you were able to pull through?
Yeah, I think if you talk through light jets, it's recognition and response, right? So someone calls in and you get to those scenarios. I think that's where it's taxing, especially when you're single pilot.
Yeah.
When you're single pilot, because you have something that's happening in the back, and that you may have a layperson that's a passenger, especially if there's only two people in the back. One is panicking, and then your goal and purpose is to safely operate the aircraft. So I would say that would be something that's more taxing for the crew, but for us, it is, okay, there's no one back to respond. This person's panicking, so let's get you on the ground as quickly as we possibly can, but in that right location. And so it becomes more of how are we taking the information you're providing us, processing it with our physician and our global response center as quickly and efficiently as possible to get you on the ground to manage that. I think from a light aircraft perspective, that'd be the most challenging in a single pilot operation. Yeah. Great question so far. Anything else?
Anything else?
Can you share with the group, question for this group, and maybe Honda, would like to know how you are involved with Volato and which of these are in conversations of actually being implemented within our organization?
Yeah, so I could touch on that at a very high level. I know that we've talked through concepts, and I know that our leadership teams are very closely engaged. So where we are at now is kind of next steps towards implementation. And our goal is to develop the right solution that's the best fit for you guys. So I think that's probably the best answer to give at this point in time. But where our focus is, as you guys, again, continue this exponential growth, and you look at deploying these new systems, is building things that are right-sized for not only you as crew, but to bring new and forward-thinking solutions to your client base as well. So that's really where we stand and where we're poised today in terms of the relationship. And then, again, we do have that high-level communication that's happening right now, yeah.
And we do recognize that each flight department's a little bit different, right? So we customize our internal operations procedures to fit your organization. We're very heavily involved in the implementation, but we also believe that it needs to be trained and it needs to be tested and continually tested because you're not going to have a medical event every day, right? You could fly for months without
Hopefully
having a
not.
medical
Yeah,
event,
hopefully not.
Hopefully, right? But we're firm believers in you got to know the system, because if you're comfortable with it and if you're comfortable calling us, reaching out to us, then it won't be scary when it does happen, right? So we want to be involved in tabletop drills and your exercise, your drills that you have throughout the year. We'll play our part, and then hop off the call or leave the room. But we're very big advocates in practicing this because it's really, really important to know how to handle these situations. And I know we always focus on big, major medical events, motor vehicle accidents, cardiac arrest, all this, but it applies to everything. The whole idea is, right, to catch something before it becomes a major medical event. We take calls all day long for tiny things, earaches, upset stomachs, all of this. But it's all important, and we want your passengers to be safe and comfortable, and so it doesn't have to be a major medical before, we're happy to speak to you. So.
Yeah, and our rule of thumb, and it's whether it's in flight, in the ground, security, or medical driven, call us early, call us often.
Yeah.
You know, and as we grow the partnership, the information's there. It doesn't cost any more to call. So
Right.
if you have a question, give us a call early, often, and we're always there to help. Yeah.
And if any of you are ever in Phoenix, do come visit us, because we do like to have visitors and show off we have 2 centers. We have our corporate office, and then we have our MedLink center, which is where our in-flight calls come into. That's kind of the sexy part of it, that sits in an emergency room in Phoenix.
Yeah, and a level
So,
1 trauma center.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, great questions, guys. Are there any more before we wrap it up? All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.